The Zulu Kingdom did not exist at the dawn of the 19th century. Within a single generation, it would dominate much of southern Africa and permanently change the way wars were fought. At the center of that transformation stood one man. His name was Shaka. Born into obscurity, rejected by his own people, Shaka rose to become one of history's most feared and studied military innovators. He commanded no firearms, no cavalry, and no fortresses of stone. Yet his armies shattered rival clans, absorbed entire nations, and sent shockwaves across a region larger than modern-day Britain. European observers later described his methods as brutal and relentless. African oral histories remembered him as a lawgiver, a nation builder, and a revolutionary. Modern historians still debate whether Shaka was a tyrant, a reformer, or something far more complex. What cannot be debated is this: before Shaka, warfare in southeastern Africa followed ancient customs. After Shaka, nothing was the same. He shortened the spear to force close combat. He trained warriors to fight as disciplined units rather than scattered champions. He turned loyalty into a weapon and fear into strategy. And in doing so, he unleashed a chain reaction of migration, violence, and political collapse that reshaped the entire region. Historians would later call it the Mfecane, a time of crushing upheaval. But how did an outcast child become a king? What pressures forged his ruthless vision of power? And why did his innovations spread far beyond his own kingdom, long after his death? To understand Shaka Zulu is to understand how one individual can alter the course of warfare, society, and history itself. And it begins not on a battlefield, but in exile. At the end of the 18th century, southeastern Africa was a mosaic of small Nguni-speaking chiefdoms. These communities stretched along the coastal plains and rolling hills of what is now KwaZulu-Natal. Power rested with local chiefs, authority was personal, and warfare was limited in scale. Conflicts were often ritualized, fought with long throwing spears, and designed to settle disputes rather than annihilate enemies. This world was stable, but fragile. Population growth placed pressure on land and cattle, the foundation of wealth and survival. Drought cycles strained food supplies. Competition intensified between neighboring groups, especially among the Mthethwa, Ndwandwe, Kwabe, and dozens of smaller clans. Political alliances shifted constantly, held together by marriage ties, tribute, and fragile loyalty. Into this world, around 1787, Shaka was born. He was the illegitimate son of Senzanga Hona, a minor chief of the Zulu clan, and Nandi, a woman of the Langeni people. Their union violated social norms, and Shaka's childhood was marked by rejection and humiliation. Nandi and her son were driven from the Zulu community and forced to seek refuge among other groups. Exile shaped Shaka profoundly. African oral traditions describe a boy hardened by mockery and exclusion, but also sharpened by observation. He learned how power worked by watching chiefs rise and fall. He learned how loyalty could be bought, lost, or enforced. Most importantly, he learned that survival required strength in a world that offered little mercy. Eventually, Shaka and her mother found protection among the Mthethwa Confederation, led by the powerful chief Dingiswayo. Dingiswayo was a political innovator in his own right. He was experimenting with larger alliances, centralized authority, and more organized military systems. Under his rule, young men were grouped into age-based regiments known as amabuto, which served both military and social purposes. Shaka entered Dingiswayo's service as a warrior. It was here that his talents became impossible to ignore. He displayed extraordinary physical endurance, discipline, and an instinctive understanding of combat. Unlike many warriors of his time, Shaka questioned tradition. He observed that often battles ended indecisively, with few casualties and little strategic gain. He believed war should be decisive. The military practices of the region reflected older values. Warriors carried long, lightweight spears designed for throwing. After a brief exchange of missiles, opposing forces often disengaged. Victory was symbolic rather than absolute. Shaka saw this as weakness. To him, restraint meant vulnerability. During his years under Dingiswayo, Shaka began to experiment. He favored a heavier, shorter spear designed for stabbing at close range. This weapon, later known as the Iklwa, forced warriors to close with their enemies. It transformed combat from skirmishing into lethal hand-to-hand fighting. Shaka also abandoned sandals, toughening his feet to increase speed and endurance over long distances. Equally important were his tactical ideas. Shaka refined the use of regimental formations, most famously the horns of the buffalo. The center, or chest, engaged the enemy directly. Two flanking forces, the horns, swept around the sides to encircle and destroy. A reserve force, the loins, waited behind the lines to exploit success or stabilize defeat. This was not invented from nothing, but Shaka systematized and enforced it with unprecedented discipline. Training under Shaka was brutal by design. Warriors drilled constantly, marched long distances, and were punished harshly for failure. Loyalty to the king replaced loyalty to clan elders. The army became an extension of the state, and the state became inseparable from war. Around 1816, the balance of power shifted dramatically. Dingiswayo was captured and executed by Zwide, the ruler of the Ndwandwe, the most formidable rival power in the region. The Mtetwa Confederation collapsed almost overnight. In the chaos that followed, Shaka moved swiftly. With Dingiswayo gone, Shaka claimed leadership of the small Zulu clan, likely with Mtetwa support remnants and his own growing reputation. At first, the Zulu were insignificant. Within a few years, they would become dominant. Shaka consolidated power with ruthless efficiency. Rival claimants were eliminated, neighboring clans were defeated and absorbed. Some were incorporated into the Zulu state, their young men folded into the regiments. Others were destroyed or driven away. This was not random violence, but a deliberate strategy of expansion and control. The stakes were rising rapidly. Zwide and the Ndwandwe still loomed to the north. Drought and famine increased pressure on resources. Refugee groups began to move across the landscape, spreading conflict far beyond Shaka's immediate reach. The region stood on the edge of transformation. By the late 1810s, Shaka was no longer merely a warrior or a chief. He was reshaping society itself. Warfare had become systematic, political authority centralized, and fear a tool of governance. What began as personal survival was turning into a new kind of state. And as Shaka's power grew, so did resistance. The inevitable clash with his greatest enemies was approaching. The age of limited war was ending, and a far more violent era was about to begin. By the late 1810s, southeastern Africa had entered a period of accelerating instability. The rise of Shaka coincided with mounting pressures on land, cattle, and political authority. What had once been localized conflict was now becoming regional war. Shaka did not cause these pressures, but he exploited them with ruthless clarity. Shaka's first priority was survival. The Ndwandwe Kingdom under Zwide remained the dominant military power in the region. Their armies were large, experienced, and aggressive. Zwide had already crushed the Mtetwa leadership, by executing Dingiswayo. Shaka understood that open confrontation too early would be fatal. Instead, he used maneuver and timing. When Ndwandwe forces moved south, Shaka avoided decisive battle. He harassed supply lines, ambushed small units, and withdrew before full engagement. His regiments moved faster than any army in the region, trained to march long distances without rest. Attrition became a weapon. This strategy culminated around 1818 at the Battle of Gorkli Hill. Tsuide's son, Nunkalo, led a large Ndwandwe force against Shaka. Rather than fight on open ground, Shaka chose a defensible position near a hill and river. His warriors used the terrain to blunt the Ndwandwe advance, holding firm while flanking units attacked from concealed positions. The battle did not destroy the Ndwandwe, but it proved something critical. Shaka's army could survive direct confrontation. His tactics worked. Discipline could overcome numbers. The psychological effect was immense. Shaka's reputation spread rapidly, not just among enemies, but among undecided clans watching from the sidelines. Victory at Gorkli Hill allowed Shaka to expand aggressively. He absorbed smaller chiefdoms through a combination of force and integration. Conquered peoples were not always exterminated. Many were incorporated into the Zulu state, their identities deliberately broken down and replaced with loyalty to the king. Language, ritual, and military service became tools of unification. This system created a feedback loop. Each conquest increased Shaka's manpower. Each new regiment strengthened the army. Each victory intimidated future opponents. Resistance became more dangerous than submission. But expansion also created enemies. Refugee groups fled in all directions, carrying violence with them. Some formed new states, like the Ndebele under Muzilikazi, a former Zulu commander who broke away and carved out his own empire far to the north. Others destabilized regions hundreds of kilometers from Zululand. Historians later labeled this era the Mfecane, meaning the crushing. The term itself is debated. Some scholars argue it exaggerates Shaka's responsibility, pointing instead to environmental stress and later European disruptions. Others maintain that Shaka's campaigns accelerated and intensified existing conflicts. What is clear is that warfare reached an unprecedented scale. By 1819, Tsuide launched a final massive invasion. Two Ndwandwe armies advanced separately, intending to overwhelm the Zulu from multiple directions. This time, Shaka did not retreat. He allowed one force to pass deep into Zulu territory, drawing it far from supply and support. Then he struck. His regiments attacked relentlessly, forcing the Ndwandwe to fight while exhausted and hungry. Survivors fled north, where they collided with the second Ndwandwe army, spreading confusion and panic. The Ndwandwe state collapsed. Tsuide fled, his power shattered. The greatest military rival in the region was gone. With this victory, Shaka became the unchallenged power of southeastern Africa. But dominance brought new challenges. Managing a growing kingdom required more than battlefield success. Shaka transformed military organization into a system of governance. Regiments were settled in military homesteads across the kingdom. These settlements controlled territory, enforced order, and served as rapid response units. Warriors could not marry without royal permission, ensuring their loyalty remained with the state rather than family ties. The army was permanently mobilized. Shaka also imposed strict discipline on civilians. Tribute flowed to the royal household in cattle and labor. Justice was swift and often brutal. Punishment served not only to enforce obedience, but to instill fear.
Shaka believed fear created unity. Foreign observers later exaggerated these measures into tales of madness and mass killing. Some executions were real, others were amplified through colonial storytelling. Modern historians caution to accept all accounts at face value, noting that many were recorded decades later by European writers with limited understanding of Zulu society. Still, there is no doubt that Shaka ruled through coercion as much as charisma. His authority was absolute. He was king and commander, lawgiver and executioner. As the Zulu state expanded, it began to interact indirectly with the wider world. Portuguese traders at Delagoa Bay observed the growing movement of refugees and warriors. Missionaries and merchants heard rumors of a king who could mobilize tens of thousands of men. Long before Europeans entered Zululand directly, Shaka's influence was already shaping colonial calculations. Internally, tension mounted. The army grew larger, but so did exhaustion. Continuous campaigning drained resources. Older warriors waited years for permission to marry. Chiefs resented the erosion of their traditional authority. Fear kept the system intact, but it also bred resentment. Shaka's personal life deepened this instability. His bond with his mother, Nandi, was intense. She was his earliest protector, his source of legitimacy, and his emotional anchor. When she died around 1827, Shaka was devastated. Zulu oral tradition describes a period of extreme mourning. Shaka ordered widespread rituals, executions, and prohibitions. Some accounts claim crops were destroyed and milk forbidden. Historians debate the scale of these actions, but agree that Nandi's death marked a turning point in Shaka's behavior and governance. The kingdom entered a state of strain. Campaigns slowed. Paranoia increased. Shaka's suspicion of rivals, including his own half-brothers, deepened. Power was now concentrated in a single, increasingly isolated figure. At the same time, external threats loomed. Breakaway groups like the Ndebele were carving out new states beyond Zulu control. Trade networks were shifting. European expansion along the southern coast was accelerating, even if direct confrontation had not yet occurred. Shaka had built a military machine capable of reshaping an entire region, but it depended entirely on his authority. There were no institutions to restrain him and none to replace him. By the late 1820s, the Zulu Kingdom stood at its greatest extent and its greatest vulnerability. The system that had delivered victory now demanded constant force to sustain itself. Loyalty held, but barely. The question was no longer whether Shaka could conquer his enemies. It was whether the state he created could survive the man who created it. The answer would come suddenly and violently.
By 1828, the Zulu Kingdom was immense, feared, and brittle. Its armies remained powerful, but the rhythm that once drove expansion had faltered. Campaigns were fewer, discipline was harsher. Shaka's rule, once defined by strategic clarity, had narrowed into suspicion and control. The death of Nandi had changed everything. Shaka's mourning rituals disrupted daily life across the kingdom. Normal activities were suspended, punishments intensified. Whether exaggerated by later sources or not, the perception of instability spread rapidly among chiefs and commanders. Fear still ruled, but confidence did not. Within the royal household, danger gathered quietly. Shaka had no legitimate heir. Succession in the Zulu system depended on recognition and force, not law. His half-brothers, Dingane and Mlangana, had long lived under his shadow. Both owed their lives to Shaka's earlier mercy. Both knew that mercy could vanish without warning. Shaka's increasing isolation made conspiracy possible. Trusted advisors were dismissed or executed. Military leaders were rotated frequently to prevent loyalty networks from forming. This centralization protected the throne, but it also removed buffers between the king and betrayal. One figure remained close, Mbopa, a personal attendant with direct access to Shaka. His exact motivations are debated, but most accounts agree he played a crucial role. He understood the rhythms of the royal enclosure. He knew when guards were relaxed. He knew when the king was vulnerable. In September 1828, the moment arrived. Shaka was at his royal homestead near present-day Kwadukuza. Many regiments were absent on campaigns or stationed far away. The inner circle was thin. As Shaka stood within the enclosure, unarmed and unguarded in the way kings often were among their own, the conspiracy moved. Dingane and Mlangana entered with Mbopa. There was no public confrontation, no battle, no warning. Shaka was stabbed. The attack was sudden and decisive. Accounts differ on the exact sequence, but all agree on the outcome. The man who had transformed warfare, reshaped societies, and terrorized rivals across southern Africa collapsed in his own capital. He was approximately 41 years old. His death did not trigger immediate chaos. That in itself was revealing. The system he had built was disciplined enough to absorb the shock. Dingane moved quickly. Mlangana was eliminated soon after, consolidating power under a single successor. The regiments were reassured. Order was proclaimed. Shaka's body was reportedly buried hastily, possibly in an unmarked grave. The secrecy was deliberate. A visible tomb could become a rallying point. A myth could become a threat. With Shaka dead, the era of relentless expansion ended. Dingane inherited a powerful state, but not his brother's authority. He lacked Shaka's military genius and personal command over the army. Where Shaka ruled through fear tempered by victory, Dingane ruled through fear alone. The assassination marked more than a change of leadership. It marked the end of a singular force in African military history. Shaka had centralized power to an unprecedented degree. When he fell, there was no institutional structure strong enough to replace him seamlessly. Yet the transformation he initiated could not be undone. The Zulu army remained organized around age-based regiments. The short stabbing spear and close combat tactics remained standard. Military settlements continued to dominate the landscape. Neighboring states still measured their security against Zulu strength. Even Shaka's enemies acknowledged the permanence of his impact. The political map of southern Africa had been redrawn. Entire populations had moved. New kingdoms had formed in response to Zulu Swesha. Old ones had vanished. European observers, arriving in greater numbers in the following decade, encountered a region already shaped by Shaka's wars. Later colonial narratives often reduced him to a caricature of brutality. Modern scholarship paints a more complex figure. A ruler shaped by violence, responding to instability with radical innovation. The climax of Shaka's story was not a battlefield triumph, it was a quiet killing at the center of power. A reminder that systems built entirely around one individual can rise quickly and fall just as fast. The warrior king who had made the Zulu feared across a continent was undone not by foreign armies, but by the fragile politics of succession. And yet, even in death,
Shaka's shadow remained longer than his reign. The question was no longer how he had conquered, it was what survived him.
In the immediate aftermath of Shaka's death, the Zulu Kingdom did not collapse. Power transferred swiftly to Dingane, who moved decisively to secure his rule. Potential rivals were eliminated, loyal commanders promoted, and public order maintained. To the outside world, the transition appeared smooth. But beneath the surface, the nature of Zulu power had changed. Dingane inherited the structures Shaka built, not the man himself. The regimental system remained intact. The army was still formidable, yet authority no longer flowed from personal battlefield dominance. It depended instead on intrigue, intimidation, and fragile alliances among chiefs. Expansion slowed. Dingane lacked Shaka's appetite for constant warfare and his ability to manage its consequences. The kingdom turned inward, focused more on control than conquest. This pause would have lasting consequences. In the 1830s, new forces entered the equation. European settlers, known as the Voortrekkers, moved northward from the Cape Colony, driven by land hunger and resistance to British rule. They entered a region already destabilized by decades of warfare and migration. Dingane initially attempted diplomacy. Agreements were made, then broken. In 1838, tensions exploded when Dingane ordered the killing of Voortrekker leader Piet Retief and his party. The decision led directly to open war. The conflict culminated at the Battle of Blood River, where Zulu forces were decisively defeated by a smaller but well-armed Voortrekker commando. Firearms, defensive positioning, and new forms of warfare shattered the aura of Zulu invincibility. This defeat did not erase Shaka's legacy, but it exposed its limits. The military system he created was optimized for close combat against similar armies. It was not designed to counter gunpowder, fortifications, and colonial logistics. Internal division soon followed. Dingane's authority weakened. In 1840, he was overthrown by his half-brother Mpande with Boer support. The Zulu Kingdom survived, but now as a regional power constrained by colonial expansion. Despite these setbacks, Shaka's legacy endured far beyond his lifetime. His reforms permanently transformed warfare in Southern Africa. The emphasis on discipline, unit cohesion, and aggressive maneuver reshaped how conflicts were fought. Even groups that opposed the Zulu adopted elements of his system. Politically, Shaka demonstrated the possibility of large-scale state formation in a region long described by Europeans as fragmented. He proved that centralized authority, when paired with military organization, could mobilize tens of thousands and control vast territory. Culturally, Shaka became a symbol. In Zulu oral tradition, he was remembered with a mix of awe, fear, and pride. Songs and stories preserved his image as both a creator and a destroyer. Colonial writers, however, often portrayed Shaka as a bloodthirsty tyrant. These accounts served a purpose. By exaggerating African violence, European expansion could be framed as a civilizing mission. Modern historians have worked to strip away these distortions, reassessing sources and restoring context. This reassessment does not absolve Shaka of brutality. His campaigns caused immense suffering. Communities were displaced, thousands died. But it places those actions within a broader world of scarcity, competition, and survival. Shaka did not invent violence in Southern Africa. He reorganized it. In the modern era, Shaka's legacy has been reclaimed as part of African historical consciousness. He is studied as a military innovator, a state builder,
and a product of his time. His story challenges simplistic narratives about pre-colonial Africa. It reminds us that African history contains figures as complex and consequential as any emperor or general elsewhere in the world. The Zulu Kingdom would continue to resist colonial domination well into the late 19th century, most famously defeating a British army at Isandlwana in 1879. That victory, generations after Shaka's death, still bore the imprint of his military system. In that sense, Shaka outlived his reign.
Shaka Zulu's story is not just about conquest, it is about transformation. In barely a decade, one man reshaped how wars were fought, how power was organized, and how entire societies understood strength and survival. He rose from rejection to dominance, not through inherited privilege, but through innovation and discipline. He did not rely on numbers alone. He changed the rules of warfare, and in doing so, he forced everyone around him to change as well. Yet his life also carries a warning. The same system that brought unity and power depended completely on fear and control. It left little room for trust, succession, or restraint. When Shaka faltered, there was no safeguard. The state endured, but the cost of its creation remained etched into the land and its people. Shaka was neither a mythic hero nor a mindless tyrant. He was a product of extreme pressure, responding to instability with radical solutions. His choices saved his people from destruction and inflicted destruction on others. Both truths exist at the same time. That complexity is why his story still matters. Across Africa and beyond, Shaka's name continues to spark debate. Was he a visionary leader or a violent autocrat, a necessary reformer, or a man consumed by his own system? The answer depends on where you stand and what you value in leadership. History rarely offers simple verdicts. If this story made you rethink what you know about Shaka Zulu, share your perspective in the comments. Whose judgment should define a leader's legacy? Their intentions, their methods, or their consequences? If you value deeply researched cinematic history told without myths or shortcuts, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. More stories like this are on the way. And as you move on, remember this: the most powerful forces in history are often not armies or weapons, but the ideas that shape how people fight, rule, and remember.